We're rolling out. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Nice to see you. You are the self-identifying opposition party of Britain. So let's go through your pledges as if you were about to form the opposition with the respect that that would be met with. £141 billion of spending.
Yeah.
That's more than Labour, that's more than Tories, it's almost as much as the Green Party.
But we've actually... but we fully costed this. And look, actually, I said this repeatedly today. We're a small insurgent party. We're building this from the ground up. It's a really exciting journey. This, our contract with people, has been on the website for a long time. We've had a lot of feedback from economists, from people in my field, in medicine, for example, across the board. But we believe that there are savings to be made there. And you'll see in that contract, on the final pages, a rough costing, basically, that is understandable to most people.
One of the ways in which you're going to pay for all of this, about 40 billion quid, you say, is by not paying interest on the bank's money being held in the Bank of England.
It's super confusing.
How's that going to work?
It's super confusing. I'm not an economist.
No, that's fine, but give it to me.
Well, very clever economists have told me how this works. So essentially, the bank, the Treasury printed gilts, the Bank of England, instead of borrowing money from the Treasury, essentially borrowed from secondary markets, they paid interest on that. When interest rates were low, that was okay. But as interest rates went up, then we're spending 35 billion or 40 billion on that interest, and that is making the banks richer. So don't take my word for it, because two former deputy Bank of England governors agree with us. Even Robert Peston agrees with us that in principle this is something we can do. And actually, when you look at central banks around Europe, for example, they do exactly the same.
Well, they don't do exactly the same. They have a minimum deposit amount on which zero interest is paid. Well, your plan is to say there would be no interest paid on any reserves at all.
It is.
So what would be the incentive for a bank to hold money in the Bank of England?
It's a very good question indeed. As I refer to my previous answer, I'm not an economist, but I'm told on good grounds that this is a practical solution. But even if you say...
it's not the same as what the ECB does.
It isn't exactly the same.
No.
But if you actually take the premise that what we're doing is incorrect, there must be a middle ground.
But that's not your policy.
No, the policy, but Richard Tice believes that this is absolutely achievable, and he is far more qualified to talk about economics than I am, let me tell you.
But there's no minimum rate that would be set. You say it would bring in 40 billion. There have been other estimates that say 10 billion, and the effect of saying that there would be no interest paid on those amounts would be that the borrowing amount for banks to consumers would go up. It wouldn't be a tax on the banks, it'd be a tax on banking.
No, I don't think that's true. The banks are making vast profits at the expense of the British public. What we're saying, actually, is, look, we're trying to be as transparent as possible. This is not actually a contract just for this year. It's a contract for 5 years. There will be more meat put on this as we go forward. But what we want to say...
So it's a broad outlining of what might be possible.
I think that's very fair,
even if it's not possible
I
and no
think
one
it's
else is doing
fair.
it.
I think we're having the conversation that no one else is having.
It's because no one else thinks it's possible to do this.
I don't believe that to be true. But also, if you look at the other stuff we want to do, for example, scrapping net zero, which is a fool's paradise, that's another 30 billion that's in there. We believe that we can have efficiency savings in government of 50 billion. We're going to scrap a half foreign aid, for example, that's 6 billion. And also the employer's national insurance, because what I'm really keen to do is to train British workers in this country and stop relying on cheap imported labour.
What does net zero immigration then mean?
So we want to freeze immigration, So when you look at the figures, 2.5 million people over 2 years. So if you look at net migration, 745,000 2 years ago, 685,000. This is entirely in the gift of the government, So they can decide how many people come into this country. If you go down any high street and ask people, are there schools, are there hospitals, can you see a GP, does anything work in this country? They will all say no.
And all of that's the result of immigration?
Immigration has put huge strain on our public services. What we want is smart immigration. So your point was about net. So let's say immigration is the lifeblood of this country, and we believe that you need to have smart immigration. But when you've got 9 million people economically inactive in this country, we need to get them back to work. We've got 5 million people.
So the NHS needs more doctors and nurses.
Hang on, I'll come on to that. 5 million people on out of work benefits. Now, the NHS is an unusual example, because I agree with you that actually social care and health staff should should be exempt from this. So that's what we're saying before we train our own people. But why are we relying on
Hang on, so that won't
labour?
be frozen immigration then, will it?
So we're saying that those particular sectors, that particular sector will be exempt.
Right, so it's not frozen immigration.
It's net zero immigration.
No, hang on a minute. If it's going to be net zero, you have to have the number of people that you're bringing in, you have to have those leave in order for it to be net zero.
Exactly.
So how's that
We are making one exception, which is health and social care staff.
Right. So, and the limit on the number of people who can come into the health and social care system is?
It's what we need to fill those gaps at that time. But
so potentially whatever the NHS demands.
But the NHS can demand. The problem is that you have to have some sort of exemption.
From what's happening now?
Because actually we're bringing in people to fill all sorts of companies. That's why we're saying the employer national insurance needs to go up from 13.8% up to 20%, which brings in 20 billion quid. Why aren't companies training people in this country? Why aren't they? Because it costs them money and they don't want to do it, and they should do it.
So the net zero immigration it isn't a freeze on immigration because you'd have to do it for the NHS, and can't be net zero because you can't mandate that people leave the country.
But we know people leave the country, 500,000 or
you can't say what number. If the NHS demands a certain number of people, you can't then say, right, out you go.
But you have to, look, I've worked in the health service for a long time.
I know.
But surely, come on, the point is valid, which is actually there are people who are very capable in this country, and we need to get them back into employment. And I want people to be paid properly for social care. But this is an easy answer.
Vibes. This is just vibes policy, isn't it?
This
is like self-identifying as the opposition of the opposition party.
Let me tell you, the resonance,
policy that's sort of based on vibes that uses words like freezing immigration when it's not freezing
when
immigration.
You come out of your cosy studio and go around this country, you will see this is playing extremely well on the doorstep.
I'm sure it's playing very well, but there's not a lot of substance behind it. When you explain to people, when people ask you, well, what's it going to be frozen at, and you say, well, actually, the NHS is going to get the people it needs, rightly or wrongly, the NHS is going to get the people it needs to.
But that's a very different policy to saying 750,000 people can come in willy-nilly.
I agree with you, but that's not frozen immigration, is it?
We have said it will be net zero apart from this one exception for health and social care staff.
On education, the manifesto says, or the contract says, any teaching about a period or example of British or European imperialism or slavery must be paired with the teaching of a non-European occurrence of the same to ensure balance.
I think what we're saying is actually we need to be proud of British history. Also, multiculturalism in this country doesn't work. We want uniculturalism. We want people to be joined by a common set of values, and I think we need to teach that. We need people to be proud in this country.
Even if the thing that they're teaching them about, whether it's British slavery or other slavery, clearly isn't necessarily a source of pride.
I think it's important to see history through, all walks of history. And I think it's also to understand Britain's place in the world. But equally, we need to teach why Britain has not been a terrible power throughout history. We've actually done some great things in history and around the world.
When Nigel Farage says he thinks the country is broken, he talks about economically, he talks about socially, and he says it's culturally broken. What does he mean?
He means that it's too fragmented.
In what way?
Well, because multiculturalism doesn't work. We've got silos of people. In East London, where I live, there are silos of people who don't speak English, don't share our common values. When you look at 25-year-olds, so 18 to 25-year-olds, 25% of them, Muslims, believe in jihad. That cannot be acceptable. That's fragmented.
And that's a form of assimilation gone wrong, or integration gone
wrong.
How would that be put right?
Well, I think the reason it went wrong, and I can tell you this, when I was a junior doctor in Ealing, for example, we had swathes of people coming into this country who were basically housed all together. There was no kind of drive to assimilate and to get them immigrants to mix with other people in this country. And I think it's vital that people do. And language is part of that. You do need to speak English if you're going to live in this country.
What proportion of people who come to this country to work don't speak any English? Do we know?
I don't know the exact number.
Because the argument has been made that actually integration, whilst obviously not perfect, is far better here than it is in many other European countries.
That doesn't mean it's good.
Doesn't mean it's good, but maybe it means it's better. It's clearly got more to.
Have you been to East London?
Yes.
I can walk through the streets and I don't hear English at all.
Right, and that upsets you.
Yeah. It does, because that's not right. The fact is that if you have silo mentality and if you have different cultures operating under one roof, then we have nothing that binds us together. What binds us together is national pride and a sense of being British.
And you think that can be taught in schools by showing other examples of things like slavery from other European
I actually think the Americans are quite good at it. A pride in the country. It's about the United States.
Flags in the classroom.
I do.
Would you have that?
Yeah, I would actually, personally.
Yeah.
I think it's really important.
Children
and if you notice at our press conference, we carry around 2 Union flags all the time. I'm never without one.
Good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.